In this project, we are setting Millie Diamond in a mounting in a fishtail style. Most of the setting work is performed before the stones are set, so to make the work easier, all the cutting is performed before the center crown is fabricated. To begin setting the stones, we need to lay out their placement. I begin using dividers and mark off the center on the band, and then set my dividers to a little wider than the diameter of the diamonds. In this setting project, the diamonds will not touch girdle to girdle, so we set the dividers about a ½ millimeter wider than the diameter. Begin at the bottom bezel for the center crown and progress down the shank. Then on the band, begin from the center line that we made and work down the shank, marking off a square for each of the diamonds to fit into. Take a diamond and place it table down and check the marks to make sure there is room for the diamonds and all the squares are even. I like using a round bottom graver to mark the center for the drill bit. Some jewelers prefer using a center punch, but I like the accuracy of using a graver. You could draw an X from corner to corner, marking the exact center, but these squares are small enough that I just eyeball the center of the square. A little divot is needed right in the center of each of these squares to start the drill bit. Next, we need to drill the holes. Use a drill bit approximately 1/2 the diameter of the stone, and use your fingers to brace your flex shaft so that you drill straight. I let the side of the drill bit ride right along my index finger to support it. You want to use a slow speed but high feed, so you need to press down on the drill bit but don't turn it very fast. Use plenty of lubricant on the drill bit to keep it cool, facilitate the flow of chips out of the hole, and to keep the bit from overheating and binding. Because platinum is a sticky metal, more lubricant is needed than if working on gold or silver to keep the platinum from clogging the flutes of the drill bit or the teeth of the burrs. I prefer burr life, but any type of cutting oil can be used. Next, we need to clean the inside of the ring where the holes came through to remove any burrs and to create a slight azure. For this project, I use a small bud burr. You could use a variety of burrs, gravers, or saw blades and cut fancier azures, but for this project, we are just using a round tapered hole, and it is easiest to do that with a bud or cone burr. Next, we need to begin to cut our seats, and for that I use a high-speed steel straight-sided setting burr that is one size smaller than the diamonds. I'm setting 2 millimeter stones, and the next smaller burr is 1.9 millimeters, but that's not quite enough of a difference, so here I'll drop down to 1.7 millimeter. I'll cut a seat in each of the holes to a depth so that the table of the stone will be just even with the top surface of the metal. After I cut all the seats, I go back over each seat and make sure they are all cut to the same depth and to the correct depth. Next, we need to cut the metal out from between the diamonds. For this, I use a small wheel burr and cut a line right down through the center of the seats to remove the metal that would be between the diamonds. We are not cutting as much metal as you would if you were channel setting. This cut is not nearly as wide as the stones are. We need that metal left in the corners to make our beads. Once we have that line cut to the depth of the girdle, we need to cut across the seat to remove the metal from the sides of where the stones will sit. For this, I like using a Krause burr. These burrs are easy to break, so don't use much pressure. Let the burr do the cutting and use plenty of lubricant. Use your fingers against the burr to guide it in place and to keep it from walking across the surface. Between the cut that we've already made down the center and this new cut, a little triangle of metal is left between the stones. This is what will form the two beads to set the stones. The next step is to continue that line we cut across the stones down the sides of the mounting. Don't cut this all the way to the finger hole, just down the side a little bit. I continue using the same cross burr and bracing the ring against the bench pin and bracing my fingers against the bench pin in the ring to control the burr and to keep it from running down the side of the mounting. Cut in from the groove we first created on the top and cut on an angle to make a tapered cut down the side of the ring. Go around the outside and make this cut for each of the stones and then work on the inside so that it's cut on both sides of the stone. Around the top where the crown will be, we need to be careful not to cut into the bottom bezel. Next, I use a fine 6/0 saw blade and cut the piece of metal that's left for the beads in two to form the two beads. Cut and separate them and go back and continue that line down the side of the mounting. We are actually forming what will look like two little prongs of metal cut down the outside of the shank. Then string the saw blade through the gap between the bands and repeat the process on the inside beads. Once we have this cut on both sides, place the saw blade in the cut and cut straight across, cutting the two beads apart. Cut them all the way down to the depth of the seat for the stones. When we get to the top of the mounting, we need to be real careful that we do not saw into the bottom bezel. You can see here how difficult it would be to cut these beads if the crown was completely fabricated. Cutting these beads then would be nearly impossible. Now that we have the seats all pre-cut and the prongs all formed, we need to clean up and polish the mounting. I start with a little silicone knife-edged rubber wheel and go into all the grooves that we cut with the burrs on the side of the mounting, across the settings, and down the middle of the settings. As we use this silicone wheel, it will conform to the shape of the platinum that we cut and remove the lines left from the burrs. Next, I use a brown silicone flat-edge wheel and clean up the outside of the surface. Some fine file marks and emery marks from fabricating the rings are still there. We need to clean them up at this time to get everything ready to polish. Clean the inside of the finger hole as well with the rubber wheel. Next, I use blue platinum polish on a hard felt wheel to polish the sides of the setting, the bottom bezel, and the top of the beads where the stones will be set. Pre-polish all this with the hard felt wheel to keep the surface flat and smooth. Next, I use a bristle brush, and again using the blue platinum polish, I go over the setting. The bristle brush will get down into the seats and polish in between the beads and leave a nice shiny surface between the diamonds. Then I use a little felt wheel that is made for the snap-on sanding disc mandrel. A lot of jewelers use the snap-on sanding disc, and this is just a little plastic wheel with felt on one side. This is real handy to get down in between the shanks and to polish other areas that I cannot reach with the hard felt wheel. Once we have this polished, clean it in the ultrasonic, and finish fabricating the center crown. Now that the ring is all pre-polished and the center crown is fabricated, we're ready to set the side stones. I use a heart burr the same diameter as the diamonds, and I cut in under 2 of the beads right at the line cut by the setting burr. Then lift straight up on the burr until it is perpendicular to the mounting. When you're pivoting the burr, you need to make sure that you pivot from the cutting edge and not from the center of the burr, or you'll lift up on the burr and cut the seat up too high. You also need to make certain that the shank of the burr is perpendicular to the surface of the metal, or your seat will not be straight. When working on a project like this, I usually cut 3 or 4 seats and then go ahead and set the stones. Place the stones in the mounting and use a brass pusher to push them down securely in their seat. Next, use a number 40 flat graver and push it down into the saw cut. This will spread the beads out over the stones and lock them into place. I then select a beading tool of the correct size to fit over the beads and use that to push the beads down securely over the stones and shape them into nice round beads. I'll work one of the corner beads down on all of the stones and then turn the ring around and work the opposite bead down. Then go back and do the 2 beads in between. Using this procedure to set the beads across from each other will make sure that the stones stay level and even. When they're tightened, I move on to another section. Because the girdles of the stones are not touching each other, the burr won't hit the diamond previously set when cutting the seat next to it. When you get to the center portion, the center crown is now in place. So you have to be really careful cutting the seats and working these prongs down so that you do not hit the center crown and place any nicks or gouges in it. The final step is to go back and clean up the beads. This is probably the most overlooked step. It's the step that a lot of jewelers will leave out, but it's the one thing that you can do to your setting work that will really separate the master jewelers apart from the average jeweler. I start out using a flat graver and go around each of the beads and trim off any little flange of metal that was created by the beading tool. I then use an onglet graver to cut in between the beads and to clean any metal that is left between the stones. Then with the onglet graver, I go back over each bead and clean up any metal that did not get trimmed off with the flat graver. Taking your time to go over the mounting very meticulously with the graver, performing a final cleanup, will really make a difference and set your work apart from other jewelers. Once you're finished with the graver, your semi-mount is completed. Set the center stone and do a final buff on your buff wheel, clean it in the ultrasonic and steam it off, and your ring is ready to be delivered to your customer.